Hey everyone. So I'm publishing 4.6 for 4.6.9 today. First of all, happy New Year's to everybody that celebrated New Year's, the 2019 New Year. Today I'm gonna publish the 4.6.9. There are a couple of minor changes. Most of it is the resolving of a series of installation issues and stuff like that. And I'll do a separate video after this on the new updates on how to install pyRevit, the best practices for that. Um, just to give you a really quick tip, everybody that wants to install pyRevit for other people or sort of like maintain the pyRevit installations throughout their organization should really use the pyRevit CLI tool as the default sort of like pyRevit installer and configurator for the machines. The installer that I place on the releases here is generally for normal people that want to get pyRevit installed on their own machines and just use it and don't get involved with the development and stuff like that, or they don't want to install it for everybody else. If you have multiple people throughout your company that just want to install and manage the installations for themselves, they can use the installer from here. Otherwise, everybody should use the pyRevit CLI installer because that's the most robust and powerful tool and helps you get pyRevit on your machine in various forms and different configurations and stuff like that. So I'll do a complete video on that separately. But basically, 4.6.9 has a bunch of installation issues resolved. And then it added the 2016 compatibility on loading. Obviously, it's an older version, so some of the tools might break because of the API changes and whatnot and the updates. I don't have a full system or unit test that I can run on these various Revit versions. So let me know if you see it, if you see a tool doesn't work and stuff like that, then I can fix every single one of them on a case by case basis. The pyRevit still loads on Revit 20 back to Revit 2014, but it does not load on 2013 anymore. And I don't have any users requesting that old of a version. So obviously, I think at this point, pyRevit is officially retired for the Revit 2013 until somebody can help me figure out how to start it again. I added the pyRevit Plus back to the list of extensions. Its compatibility is not tested again. If there are issues with the tool and whatnot, any of the tools that are listed on there, you can always go to search for pyRevit Plus and go to Gate Rico's pyRevit Plus repository and submit issues and stuff like that. Just bear in mind that these extensions are created by other users. So technically, you kind of need to contact them or submit issues on their own repositories to just make sure that basically they're aware of the issues and they can resolve it. So they don't publish anything on the pyRevit issues if it's related to an extension that was created by somebody else. So that's that. And then what else? The 2019 copyright updates. I updated the R and Python 2.7.9 release candidate 1 that was published with the previous versions of pyRevit and updated to that to the final release of the 2.7.9. So that's an extra engine that is always available to you if you need to use it. And then I'm going to launch pyRevit here. Also, per one of the requests from the users, I updated I spent a little bit of time and updated the search mechanism for lists. Whenever you're like open up, you want to apply something, and then pyRevit asks you to select sheets or select a series of options from a list or select a couple of views or revisions and stuff like that. It always shows you this template list window that has a search bar, a filter bar on the top. So the fuzzy searching has been added for that. So you can use different words and stuff like that, and the match doesn't have to be identical for it to actually perform a match. And I'll show you how the new system works. Okay, so pyRevit, like for example, if you want to go, I don't have a very good example in here, but let's not that one. Yeah, let's this. Like this is the filter bar that I was talking about, and I've added like a filter icon in here. So the search that you perform here now is a fuzzy search, and it depends based on sort of like it's a smarter search. Like you can say one level, and you can see the matches and stuff like that. It doesn't, the words don't have to follow in exact format as before. So it's a slightly better search mechanism. And then obviously there are binary updates of the pyRevit CLI tools that are shipped with this, but the most sought out and sought after and exciting tool that's been added to the 4.6.9 is the Keynote Manager. And then just to show you, that's 4.6.9, and then I've updated some of the subtitles and stuff like that for pyRevit for consistency. But basically the corporate updates are here and stuff like that. But basically the most important exciting tool that's been added to pyRevit is the Manage Keynotes tool that I'll demonstrate right after now. So let's talk about that. There's one thing that I wanted to mention is that I've resolved some of the DLL load issues and whatnot. Some of the users have been experiencing issues with this Git RVT info tool. So now across all the different Revit versions that I have from back to 2016 or 15, this tool loads and works fine. So now you can just click on that and then go pick I don't know, a Revit model, whatever. And when you open that, it actually gives you all the information about what Revit version it is and document ID. And if it's a family file, it even tells you, let's see, let's load this maybe, or a door. It even tells you that the model is a family, and it tells you the category, and if it has a host, it'll tell you what the host is for that family. So yeah, so some of these DLL load issues have been resolved as well. Now let's talk about the Keynote Manager. I'm going to basically split the conversation about the Keynote Manager into two different categories. One is just the general usage of the tool and the setup and stuff like that. And the other one is giving you a little bit more detail about how the managed Keynote system works, specifically when it comes to the formatting of the text file for the keynotes and stuff like that. So basically on this one, I'm just launching a new Revit file, and I have this Keynote file that is basically one of the standard Keynote files. I think it's a metric Keynote file that comes with, preloaded with Revit. It has about 3,900 keynotes in it. So it's a fairly large Keynote file. In most of the projects that I've worked on, we never got to having this many keynotes in the same Keynote file. But just to show you that it can handle this kind of complexity in this kind of large files. If you have a new file and you basically just want to set it up, it tells you that the Keynote file is not accessible. Please select the Keynote file. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to select that text. This is equivalent of basically selecting the Keynote file from here. So you can do this, do that as well. This Keynote management system is not taking away any of the existing features of Revit from you. It's just that it adds another level on top of it, so things are easier to work with. So this is the standard Keynote selection tool, selection window basically that still works. So I'm going to say Manage Keynote. Now it's already tied to it. The Keynote Manager looks at the file, and it knows that it's not formatted for the Keynote management system. And if you want to know more about the formatting and why this window pops up, listen to the second part of this conversation, which is the more advanced part. But basically, it tells you that the file needs to be converted to a format usable by this tool. And the resulting Keynote file is still readable by Revit and could be shared with other projects. So it's still a standard formatted text file that Revit can read. The Keynote Manager doesn't break that tie and the standard between the communication between Revit and simple text file. So you can still use that for in other projects without even using the managed keynotes and whatnot. You can still archive that file with your project just to have the keynotes available to it. And 5 years from now, if you open one of these models in the new version of Revit, hopefully, but there's nothing that Keynote Manager does that would break that. You don't need to have the pyRevit Keynote Manager 3 years from now to be able to open one of your projects. And then the user should be making changes should not be making changes to the existing Keynote file during the conversion process. So are you sure you want to convert? And I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to go onto the desktop and say, this test import file. So when I hit convert, it converts the file, and it takes a little bit of a while because it has 3,900 keynotes that it has to import. So it's it creates that. It creates a backup file in here with the same name. And you can basically, this is the backup that has the your Keynote system in the old format. And oh, God damn it, this is not very helpful. So this has the original Keynote file. It just makes a copy of it, basically a backup copy, and starts a new Keynote file with the same name and imports all of this back into the Keynote database. And you hit OK, and when you open it, you see all the keynotes listed in here. Now, this is the only window, basically the main window for pyRevit Keynote Manager. It has some of the features that are related to changing the Keynote file and opening the location of the Keynote file and refreshing and basically rereading the Keynote file and stuff like that. So this corner, the top right corner, has the some of these like relinking and changing the Keynote file functionality. There is the upload model. So when you're done with this, you can either close the window or just hit update model, and it updates your model. There are some more advanced actions related to this. So for example, if you change a key of a keynote and you hit update model, the tool actually searches inside your model and changes those keynotes to the correct keys. This rekeying specifically that I use as an example is not implemented yet. I'm going to use that. Well, the only reason that I'm doing it is that I don't want to throw out 50 different features for testing and then make testing process very hard. So this is the first beta test of the tool. I'm giving you some of the features, most of the features that gives you a very functional Keynote Manager, and then all these more advanced features we'll add them as we go on, hopefully in the next month or two, when I hear back, results about the testing, and we can fix the core first, and add on top more features on top of that. But basically that's that. And then the sort of like the editing features are separated into two major categories. What's the categories, which are these, the categories that you have for keynotes, and then the keynotes themselves. I know that the keynote structure is just basically a tree. It has some root elements like these that are called generally the categories, and then you have some child elements under these roots that are where I'm calling those the actual keynotes. Generally, based on the best practices, you don't use these categories as keynotes inside your model. These are these root keynotes. Parent keynotes are the ones that you use to organize other keynotes based on the discipline, or based on the sheet range that you have, or based on their application area and stuff like that. Use it to organize your keynotes, and that's sort of like the structure that I'm kind of like, I don't want to say enforcing, but I'm suggesting, and this tool is based on that. So it's sort of like gives you a way of traversing and navigating between these root elements as categories separately from the actual keynotes. But there's also an all categories option here. So if you go on this, you see that the categories are listed as root elements. So you can still work with them and edit them and make changes to them and stuff like that. But you can also go and see the category. So when you go and switch to a different category, it shows you all the sub keynotes under that category. So you can easily switch between these and just navigate between the different keynotes that are listed under that category. As you can see, the category is not listed here anymore. It's the parent, and all the children are listed under that window. You can always go back to all categories. So adding new keynotes, and then if I switch to a category selected, you can delete and you can edit the selected category. And I'll demonstrate all this. Same thing applies with the keynotes. If I have a keynote selected here, I can delete, edit, add a new keynote, add a new sub keynote. So just like this is a sub keynote to this master keynote. You can add a sub keynote to the selected keynote. You can duplicate a keynote. You can find instances, use cases of that keynote inside your project, and I'll demonstrate all that. The only two features that are not implemented is changing the keys and the keynote history system. That need a little bit of, I need to pass this phase of first testing of the tool, just make sure everything works, everybody's happy, it has the base features, and then we'll extend right after that with the keynote history and the ability to rekey keynotes to a different system. You can always use the import keynotes to import an series of keynote files into your existing project. And you can export all or visible. One of the things that I generally use that I find very valuable is that, like, for example, if I go here and I want to export these keynotes only, you can say all the keynotes or just the visible ones here. So you can export this to a, let's say, test file. And if I go and open that text file, you can see, oh, bad click. You can go and open this here and see that it only exports the category and those keynotes only. So I like to keep these little small text files that relate to different subjects or different application areas or different disciplines that only have the keynotes and the main category for that basically topic or the application area. And you can go and import those text files on a case-by-case basis. So when I go to this project, I have like these 20 different templates of keynotes depending on keynote files, depending on what kind of project they're on. And when you open a project, you can just hit import keynotes and select those files and import them the way into your project the way you want it to be. So there's sort of like those template simple text files act as a master database for all the keynotes that you have, and you can selectively import the categories or the main parent keynotes that you want. So this tool actually helps you create that that database of text files using these categories that you have. So you can open your master file, change the category, export the visible ones, and save these separately to be able to use on different projects. Anyway, so you have the import and export features in here as well. That's basically the overall functionality. I'm going to close this project and use the one that I have, the Keynote family loaded in this, and a bunch of silly keynotes all over the place, just to show you. So now I'm going to close this. I'm going to let's say this is an actual model with some keynotes in it. So when I open the Keynote Manager, the first thing, oh, I think we used that one. Okay, so one of the things that you notice is that there's some black items. Everything that's grayed out is that it means that it's not used in the project. Everything that's sort of like black like that, darker like that, it means that they are used. This filtering system, you can search for keynotes that you want, and you see that performance is fairly good across a keynote file that has 3,900 keynotes in it. So like say facility operations, or say, I don't know, let's say you're looking for a fire extinguisher. You can search it and you can see that none of these have been used in your project right now. This filter button here is actually a button. So if you click on it, you have some smart filters like show me the used only. And it shows you the used only or unused or the locked and unlocked, that I'll talk about what they are. Let me actually launch another instance of Revit here. If you notice, I'm using a different version just to show you that this tool works across different versions as well. So this is showing me the use. Then I can extend my search with typing more. So temporary, anything that has temporary and also used. That filter, this is what that filter means basically. And then you can double click on any of these keynotes and add a keynote anywhere you want. And as you can see, while you're in the tool adding, because Revit API doesn't really have a feature to ask for adding a keynote, so I sort of like created a hack that allows you to sort of like create the keynotes. But while you're adding all these keynote elements, the watcher is watching your model for changes, and it's registering all these new keynotes that you have added. And once you're done with it, like for example, I'm going to go add 3 keynotes in here. Another one, let's say here. When I'm done with this, and if you see a window pops up and it closes, so it sort of like watches for Revit asking you to pick a keynote, and it cancels it out because you have already done that using the Keynote Manager. So when you hit escape and you're done, it actually applies the keynote that you selected to those keynote elements. So sometimes, especially if you're using an element keynote, you might select a keynote, like for example, let's see, I don't know. I'm not using an example. Like let me just use the standard Revit keynote, create an element keynote, and see which one. Like for example, this has a keynote element. So if you create a keynote, sort of like an element keynote from the Keynote Manager, pyRevit Keynote Manager, you'd see that number, the existing keynote first, and then you create it, and Revit, the Keynote Manager, will apply the new keynote after it's done. So let me demonstrate that. For example, in this case, I'm going to go to Keynote Manager, and you have this combo box in here that asks you what kind of keynote you want to place. Some of these configurations are recorded based on what project you're using and what keynote file they're on. So like in this model, if I use an element keynote and I go to a general category and double click on this, and when I go here, see that's not the number that we picked, but the keynote selection, keynote creation system in the Revit API is showing me what's existing. So don't freak out. Just create your keynote, and when you're out of the tool, the what is it, the management, see the pyRevit manager applies it, and if you notice, these two also changed because these are the same walls and they use the same keynote, the element keynote basically. So that value is updated now. But the other thing that I was talking about, if you go to the managed keynote, you see that the element keynote is still selected and you're still in the previous category. So if you're creating multiple different keynotes, going through different sheets and stuff like that, the tool actually remembers its location on the location, even like the size of the window, if you which monitor that you placed it on, and stuff like that. And it's sort of like can basically update to the sort of like give you a known environment between two launches. So that's that. That's how you basically place a keynote. Now, if I want to know, I know that I can see that this keynote has been used, but I want to go and find the use cases of that keynote. You can just click on this search icon, and it lists you all the use cases for that keynote. And you can, this is, if you know this is a well-known clickable link thing in pyRevit. So I can just keep this on top and click on these, and it would take me through all these different keynotes that I've created. And if they are in different views, it actually shows you what kind of keynote it is. It's an element keynote at level 1, which is that specific view that we have placed that keynote on. So it takes you between the different keynotes that you want, and you can close this window later. So that's that, and then that's basically it. And then let's go talk about creation and editing of the keynotes. So let me go and set up the other one. I'm going to go create a new file in here in the 2018 and set it up to read the same keynote file. So pyRevit Keynote Manager is going to ask me that you don't have a keynote file. Go select one. I'm sure yes. I select that one, loads it, everything's fine. And you can see because I'm on the same machine, so the configuration is for me as a user, but you can see it's still selecting the keynote element and the general requirements because that's what I selected the last time I used the manage window in here. So if I select a keynote, I can edit the keynote in here. So I'm going to click on that, and you can see this new window pops up that has 3 major sections. The top part is the keynote key, the keynote text, and the keynote parent, the 3 variables that you can change for every keynote. Now, currently in the current implementations, these 2 are locked. Later, we add this one so you can rekey a keynote, and this one so you can change the parent of the keynote and basically move a keynote to a different location. But as for the text, you can just edit the text however you want to. The Keynote Manager system writes the keynote file in the exact formatting required for Revit to be Unicode. So you can type, in different languages in here. I've added some, utility buttons in here. So if you want to capitalize a keynote, you want to change the casing of the keynote to title and sentence and stuff like that, you can use it from here. There are 2 things that I generally use on my projects that I've added in here. We can do better implementations of this in the future, but basically there are times that you want to delete a keynote, but you still want to reserve a key because that's somewhere in the middle. It's the best practice. Don't delete a keynote that is sitting in the middle of the range. For example, if you go and edit let's say A4, and I say edit, and if I want to delete that keynote, you lose the A4 key, but the range is still there. So what I do is that I'm going to use this change text to reserved. So when you click on this, it changes the text to reserved for future use, and you can update your key like that. So everybody can see that keynote exists. The text says reserved for future use. Every time in the future that you want to add a keynote to that category, you can just search for this for the word reserved and use one of those reserved keynotes. Or sometimes I want to let everybody know not to use a keynote, so I'm just going to click on this and say add do not use in front of the text, so everybody can see that there's a text there, there's a keynote there. We keep the text and everything in the text file, but basically just inform users to not to use this. And then this feature will come in the future. I thought of it, and I thought it would be a handy thing to use the some free open source API, cloud API to perform translations for text and stuff like that. This will hopefully come in the future. I think it would be a kind of like a cool feature. So in this case, like I want to go and capitalize this, and I'm editing this keynote right now. Now, the cool thing is that as I promised, one of the most important things for me is that the users of this, the people, the staff on this project, the people that are working on this project need to be able to manipulate this Keynote file simultaneously. So if somebody else on a different Revit version or whatever is setting somewhere, and they want to make changes to the keynotes, they open it and they can see that the keynote is being edited by that user. Now, the username is kind of like a crazy Joe BRRR username, but whatever that username that you have will show up in here across your organization. In this project, this is grayed out because this is a new file and we haven't really used the keynote anywhere. That's why it's sort of like grayed out, but it still shows you that somebody is editing that keynote. And while someone is editing that keynote, nobody else can make any changes to it. Now, you can make changes to other keynotes, like I can go and start editing this one. And while I'm in the edit window, if I go to this other one and I close this, you can see that I can see that the result is editing the other one. So I can't make any changes to this keynote. Same thing applies to the category. So if I go in here and I have that category I want to apply, when I make editing, edit the text for that category, the users will be able to see that that category is being edited by somebody. So that's the most important feature, to just let everybody know that that somebody is making changes to one of the keynotes or the categories. And I'll show you in the advanced section how this mechanism exactly works. The other good thing is that sometimes, so yeah, let's just say I want to edit this keynote and I'm here, I want to capitalize everything and I want to update the keynote, and it updates that keynote for me and updates it in the file. So if I'm here, was it the general requirement? Yeah, you can see that the keynote is updated. The other thing is that, so that's basically editing the keynote. If you want to delete a keynote, this Keynote Manager at the moment doesn't let you delete any keynote that has sub keynotes, so you kind of have to go delete those first and then make changes to it. Same thing to the categories. We'll extend the functionality of this in the future. Part of the reason is that the lock-in mechanism must be checked for, just to make sure that none of these sub keynotes are locked by anybody else. Nobody is making any changes to it and stuff like that. That same sort of like challenges are applied to the rekeying. So if somebody is working on a keynote and somebody else is changing the key for the parent category, all those sub keynotes needs to be updated with the new category, need the new key of the parent category. So there are a couple of challenges related to making batch changes across rekeying the keys and making deleting a lot of keynotes from the keynote file and stuff like that. But we'll eventually add these in the next month or two into the system, just to make sure that we have a very robust Keynote Manager. You can always duplicate a keynote. So when I hit the duplicate keynote, it sort of like uses the settings from this keynote. So when I duplicate, it picks the parent, the existing parent of this keynote. It selects the text the way it used to be. So I'm going to say duplicate, the exact same. And then the only thing I have to do is to pick a key for it. Now, the key selection system in the Keynote Manager works. It's sort of like, I tried to make it as smart as possible. So when you click on this tool, it actually looks across your whole Keynote file and collects all the existing values. So as you're typing, if you see that red box down there, it basically tells you that there are some similarities between what you're typing and the keynotes that are existing. So if I say 167, you see that it shows me there are similar keynote keys that has been used in this file. But the OK button is active. It means that this is still unique. It's just helping you to understand the sort of like existing patterns have been used across the keynote file, so you can adjust your new key. But if you use something that's exactly it's not unique, it still shows you there, and the OK button is deactivated because you can't really create that. It's still it's used. Now, so I'm going to pick something here. Let's say I want to go look across this. What's the duplicate that we have is 01530.a. Let's say I want to use, and see if I go through the list, I can say, and it sorts them based on reverse. So the larger number is on top. So I can say that's the last one that I have. So A7 is the new one. So I'm going to duplicate this. And when I click on this OK, it actually reserves that key for me. So if somebody else, if while you're adding or duplicating a keynote, somebody else wants to go and add a keynote in here and they want to use the exact same number, see 530.a. See, the 7 is still listed here right now. So nobody else can use that number because you have already reserved it while you're in the editing process. If you cancel out, it cancels that reservation, so that Keynote the key will be available again. But basically, this is how you can add a duplicate keynote in the file, and then nobody else can use that. They have to use something else. And in this instance, I'm adding a keynote, so the text is empty. So you just add that, and then the parent is because I had sort of like this general category selected, and I said I actually had selected one of the keynotes in here. It used the parent category as the category. So you can that's how you can add a keynote. So this is the new keynote that we created, and you can also add a sub keynote. The parent is already set to that keynote. So sub keynote, and then go pick a key. See, I'm going to use 01, but 01 has never been used across my database. It still shows me all the other patterns that have been used that are similar, but there's nothing that limits me from using 01. So I'm just going to use 01 as the sub keynote. And there's no technical limits to how many levels you can go in sub keynotes. So you can say, I can create a sub keynote under this even, but generally try to avoid this unless you have a very good reason for doing so. It's easier to have sort of like one level of categories and maybe another level for the parent keynotes of subjects, and then the third level. Like try to limit it to 3 to 4 levels max. Beyond that, it's sort of like probably needs to be reorganized in a different in those anything that's listed under those level 5 or level 6 and stuff, they could be reorganized in a different way. So that's basically it, and that's how you add keynotes. You can also add the categories in here too. I probably did not do a very good job of talking about these, but the functionality is very simple, and I think it's very intuitive. So you just click on this, you want to add a category. Category doesn't have a parent, so you don't see the parent button here. I want to use a category. Same thing applies in here. You can't use any of the use that you have used on the keynotes. The key that you use should be unique across the whole file. So I'm going to say just cat1. That's my category, and then my category, and then add a category, and it switches to your category, and it's empty. It doesn't have any keynote. So when I click a keynote, it's going to use my category, the selected category, as the parent already. So new keynote. I'm going to say cat101, and then add a keynote. That's there, and they can add a sub keynote and stuff to it. cat1.01a sub keynote. It also, you can't enter, so you can't have a multi-line thing, but you can, create a very long keynote text. And it also, in the user interface, it wraps the keynote, so it shows you the full content of the keynote text that you have. Also, it has this feature that is the sort of like provided by the WPF interface, that is spell checking. So it, highlights stuff if you're incorrectly typing things, and I can add the sub keynote in here, and everything's good to go. And I say update model, and all these keynotes are available to me, and it remembers the last keynote that you have. So this is as far as the features that I've implemented right now. And if you want to delete it, you can just click on this, and I'm going to delete that keynote, and it would remove it from the file that we use for the project. So that's basically how it works. So adding categories, editing categories, which is editing the text of that category. It says my category, you can edit the text, deleting the category. If you have a keynote selected, new sub keynote, edit the keynote, delete the keynote, duplicate the keynote, and search for the keynote instances. We talked about all of these. Refresh is just reloading. This is rekeying to a new keynote file, showing the keynote file location that you're using for that project, just going straight to it. Updating the model, the selector for what kind of keynote you want to place in that project. And this is also sort of like, as I mentioned, all this configuration is project based. So if you're have multiple projects in your Revit open, and you're managing the keynotes for multiple different projects, the configuration that you have on the window is per project, and it would remember that for even if you shut down your computer and stuff like that, it saves that in pyRevit configurations. So every time you launch that project, you launch your Keynote Manager for that project, it knows the window location, it knows the last category that you used, and the sort of like the keynote type that you want to use for that project. And then this enable history which come on, in the future when you would open a keynote file, enable the history on it, and you can start tracking the changes and who made the changes and stuff like that on those keynotes. We talked about the import export features, and basically that's everything that's implemented here right now. Now let's go. Anybody that just wants to use this Keynote Manager, you can do so. You can download the 4.6.9, and the beta version is there. There's a beta version, sort of like uh, commenting here that says beta used for testing only. Please don't use this on your actual projects and then send me emails and issue requests for things that failed. This is under test. I'm taking it out there, showing it to you because this is the best way that I know for testing. Like if you guys, it's a bigger, much bigger audience. You use it across multiple different languages, different styles of keynotes and stuff like that. So I get a really good feedback on how this thing could be used and what features need to be added to it. So that's that. Now let's talk about how this Keynote Manager actually works. Let's go and open. I'm going to close. No, actually, let's keep both of them open. I'm going to go in here and use my VS Code to look at this. Okay, so this is the Keynote file. As you can see, it's very similar, almost identical to just a normal Keynote file that you have. The only thing that pyRevit is doing, it's using the fact that any line that starts with a hash is actually a comment line. So it starts saving information in the Keynote file as comments. So there's like comments that the pyRevit Keynote Manager can understand. What I actually did is that I created a whole database, new database engine, which has a sort of like a silly name right now, but I'm gonna keep it for the sake of consistency. You don't have to change the name of it in the future. But basically, I'm calling it DifRelDB, which is delimited flat file relational database. So it's a database management system that works with a single text file. You can store multiple different databases, tables, and stuff like that inside that text file. You can define the delimiter for the value to basically that separates the field values on each one of these records. So this record has 3 fields. It's key, it's text, and it's parent. In a different table, you have a different configuration for that table. Like for example, let's talk about the formatting. So the first line is the data store. It says that this text file is a data store for multiple different databases. Its formatting is TXT. The source is that text file. Its version is 0.1 right now, and then the encoding is UTF-16 because that's what Revit wants. So that's the configurator line that basically describes that data store to this database engine that I've created. And then inside it, there is a database. So any line that starts with this, this formatting, it's a database definition. So there's a database defined here that says transaction database, and the description is internal database. And then inside that, there's a table that is called the logs table. The description is logs table. The separator is tab. It's internal, yes. It supports tagging. It does not support history. It doesn't need encapsulation for the field values. Encapsulation means that, like for example, you can encapsulate this in codes just to make sure that it's following a specific format. So it doesn't need encapsulation. It doesn't need headers that I'll talk about later. The key for this table is log key UID, and then after the definition of the key, you have the values for. You have the 3. Well, actually, it's more than that. You have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fields for this table, and I'll talk about what this table actually is. And then, so this part of it, until this point, this is a normal DifRelDB database, right? It has a data store and it has a transaction table that the DifRelDB database uses for managing transactions. So pyRevit Keynote Manager basically uses this. Let's go into the code here. Well, let's open this. Let's open both of them. Oh, God damn it. Okay. So pyRevit Keynote Manager uses this DifRelDB C# module, the .NET module, to basically use this database engine to create a text file that is readable by Revit as well. And that's the whole purpose behind creating such a format. So what the Keynote Manager, the pyRevit Keynote Manager does is that it creates a new database inside this file and calls it the Keynotes DB. And you can see there's a new database definition, Keynotes DB, the description is pyRevit Keynote Manager Database, and it creates two tables inside the database. One is the categories table, and it does that because the categories, category records have different field format. They only have two fields. The keynotes have three fields, and that's how it works. That's the way it's sort of like familiar with Revit too. You could do it. You could combine these categories in the same thing and just have null values for the third column. But I decided to do this because this table is on top, so the file is also nicely formatted. There's a very clear separation between the categories and the actual keynotes that have been used. So there's a categories table inside that database, and there's a keynotes table inside that database, and the separator and stuff like that are configured so Revit can use it. Now, if you have ever worked with relational databases, you know you can create relationships between tables. So at the end of the definition for this table, like for example, the key is keynote key, and you can see there are three text fields. The first text field is the keynote key. The second text field is the keynote text, and the third keynote basically field is the parent key. And now there are two wires that's connecting tables together in this configuration. The first wire is the parent key, which is this record on this table, wiring to category key. And then the second one is the parent key that's here, wiring to its own key as well. So you can use the records inside this table as the parent for other records inside this table. Basically, that's what supports the sub keynote system. Now, this is probably too much. You don't really need to know anything, related to this. Just note: do not make any changes to the texts that are written inside these comments, or don't add anything to it. If you want to add a keynote, you can still go here and add a category in here. So I can say category 2, hit a tab, actually put an actual tab, because depending on your editor, your tab key might place spaces. My second category, and hit save. And if I load it here, that second category is listed here. So it's fully backward compatible. You can start adding records to it. Now, in the future, when you add the history system, if you add something manually in here, obviously it doesn't have history, because history is tracked through the transactions. So if you use the Keynote Manager to add, edit, make changes, blah, 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 that's how it tracks the history. If I come and add something in here, the only thing that it sees in history is that that's been added, and it doesn't know who edited the file and stuff like that. So it's best practice just to get into use the fact that don't edit the Keynote file from now on and just use the Keynote Manager to do so. But the point I'm trying to make is that the file is still fully backward compatible. The only thing that you have to do is to convert this file into the standard file. Is just get rid of these comment lines. And there are 6 lines that you have to delete from this file. And this file is exactly formatted just like whatever else that Revit is using. You can also use the export system from here. So you can just open the Keynote Manager and export all the categories that you have. Just export all to a text file. And basically what it does is that it exports just the keynotes without the comment lines into a separate text file. So you can also do that. But even if you didn't do it at the end of your project and you archive this file just like this, and 2 years from now you want to open the Keynote file and whatnot with your Revit model, there's nothing that basically limits you. If you click on any of the keynotes and open it, this standard window for selecting keynotes still works, because this keynote file, it's still formatted and it's familiar to Revit. Even if you write Chinese or other languages and stuff like that into these keynotes, it's fully backward compatible. You can see the categories in here, and everything's fine. So as you're modeling around your model, if you want to use your standard user keynote and just place something in here and let the window pop up, you can still use this. Like across the whole Revit file, you can still use. You don't have to use the Keynote Manager system to pick and place keynotes. You can still use the old system. But, well, the challenge is that this window doesn't have any search, so it makes it a little bit harder. But if you have a fairly simple keynote structure and you want to go through the categories and pick one, that's completely fine. It's fully backward compatible. So that's basically how this text file works. I don't go into much detail about this. If you're a developer and more interested about knowing this, you can take a look at the files and whatnot. The general overview is that there's a database connector that connects that database and handles all the database functions, database calls. It supports the begin and end the block transactions as well as single transactions. And then there's a database formatter interface that defines a minimum interface required for formatters that can write to these text files. And then database functions, which are the read, write, the CRUD functions for all the database, the data store manager, the data types accrues across the data, like the text field, boolean, byte, integer, date, time, timestamp, blah blah blah, that are going to be used across the database. Some of these fields have it's not a fully implemented database engine. I've only implemented the features that I needed to support the pyRevit interface, but this is something that could be used, it could be developed fully in the future to be able to support all the other file formats that we need to write for Revit and sort of like manage it. Like for example, a shared parameter file, and that's part of the reason that this header feature is also available to it, because the shared Keynote file actually writes the headers of these records on top of the Keynote, on top of the shared parameter file. So this is something that we can develop in the future and take it to the next level. But basically, at this point, at its 0.1 initial beta version, it's supporting all the functionality that's inside the Keynote Manager. So that's basically how the text file is formatted. Everything else around it is just, there are two major windows in the tool that are actually, let me open that. There are two windows, the Keynote Manager window and the Edit record, which edits the categories and everything else, and the Keynote DB module that handles all the communication between the Keynote Manager and the database engine, and handles the timeouts and timeout errors and stuff like that if there's any, and the script that provides all the like editing, adding new keynotes, blah blah blah, supports the functionality for these two windows basically. It's very simple tool. You can take a look at the code if you want to add more features to it and whatnot. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is that this is the first beta release, and there's things that we have to test. During this testing, you might see that, actually I wanted to talk about the log option. You can see, so if I start editing this and we go to the text file, you can see that a log definition has been added, a record has been added to the logs table, which basically tells that on the machine Leo 1010, which is this machine that I'm using, this user with that connection ID is locking the Keynotes database, Keynotes, that Keynote entry. That's how all the other users read this text file. Basically, the Keynote Manager on all the other machines read this text file, look at the logs table, and see what's locked and who is locking it. That's how it shows you basically who is editing that Keynote, the specific Keynotes. And this lock system is part of the transaction for that database engine, so it doesn't let anybody else run a change on unless you open this text file and edit it manually. You can't, through the interface, you can't edit that entry because it's has a hard lock in here. So that's how the locks work. And then when I release it, when I close this one, it released the locks on that element, on that record or entry or whatever that is. So I'm gonna, what I was gonna say? Oh, so during this process, if the tool fails, if it crashes, if it closes your Revit and stuff like that, you might see locks getting stuck in here in this text file and not being released or deleted and stuff like that. So if you see that there's a Keynote, there was an error or whatnot, and you open Revit and you're like, well, nobody's touching my Keynote file, but this tool is showing me that Keynote is being edited, you can always open this Keynote file and delete these locks from here. Don't use it as a hack to take the rights away from other users that are editing the text file. Just be gentle and be nice and let people, make their changes and stuff like that. But if the tool crashes and sort of like you have to fix it, that's the first thing that you can look at to see if there's anything defined in the log table. You can just select all those lines, delete it, close it, and then the next time you open this, there are no logs and nobody's editing that. So like, for example, in this one, let's put an edit on this and go in here and go in here, and then it tells me that's being edited. So if I go in here and delete that log, that this editing prompt will go away and you can actually edit those keynotes. That's one. And then the second one is that there's a pretty clear description of how transactions work inside the notes section of the database C# file. and it basically describes the 3 steps on every transaction. Every time you start a transaction through for this file, in this Keynote file, 3 things need to happen. Two of these things are related to the logs. So if you want to make a change to this, the database engine has to write the new log. The second step would be write your new changes to this entry, and then third step would be to release the log. Every time the database engine is making changes to the log system, that's an exclusive access. So the way to do it, it creates, if you might have noticed through the video while I was showing my desktop, but I don't have a good way of implementing and showing it to you right now because the process is very quick. But what happens is that you see a log file with the exact same name of that Keynote file. So it looks like this. Instead of the, I think it says the text. Oh, actually, instead of text, it says log. So it looks like this. It's a log file for that text. So it creates these log files to notify every other instance of the pyRevit Keynote Manager or this database engine that I am editing the logs in that table, in that database. That's an exclusive access. So if the tool crashes and anything happens and you see nobody's using the Keynote Manager, but there's a log file remaining there, you can delete that to release the log. If that log file is there, like for example, nobody is making any changes to that Keynote file right now, but I've manually created that log file. So if I open the Keynote Manager right now, and I want to edit a feature, see, even if the log is there, you can still read. But if I make, actually, hold on. I think I created the wrong test import. Which is the one that we're actually using? Maybe it's the text file unlock. Oh, I had a space in there. So that's there. So if I open the Keynote Manager, see, it gets stuck because there's a lock there. So it says, okay, somebody has a lock on it. And that's an exclusive lock. I'm not allowed to read the database right now until it's been updated. And it gives you a timeout because it waits for 10 seconds, and like if nobody's releasing the lock, I'm gonna just show the user a timeout and not get you stuck on your Revit model and whatnot. So that might happen during these errors. You might see that the lock gets stuck in there. Maybe somebody else's Revit crashes and this lock doesn't get deleted, or there's an IO error and stuff like that. So if that happens, you can just freely delete that log file. Everything's fine. It's not that big of a deal. And then open your managed keynotes, and it opens everything again. Same thing happens during the editing. If that lock exists, it means that somebody is writing or releasing a keynote. And obviously I had other options for this that might have made this process a little bit simpler, but I went for the simplicity. Everything is managed through inside this single text file. All the keynote, I could have written a different file with the log tables and stuff like that, but everything, I decided to create this simple database engine that writes everything and manages everything in that single keynote file, so that you don't have to worry about too many different files being around and stuff like this. So that's basically the only things that I wanted to tell you while you're running the test. The backup file that we generated when we imported the old file is still there. You can keep it in your project file and stuff like that just for the future use. But that back file is actually just a simple text file that is basically a copy of your previous standard Keynote file. That's basically it as far as what the Keynote Manager is. I hope you like it, and I hope it saves you a whole bunch of time and money. Obviously, I don't have anything against all the other add-ons and whatnot that are out there. They're great, keynote management systems out there that allows you to work with the cloud and share between projects, between multiple different offices that you have and stuff like this. So, pick your poison, see what you want, see what helps you and stuff like that. My attempt at this Keynote Manager is to provide the functionality that Revit sort of lacked, with a simple interface to be able to add and manage your keynotes and be able to search for your keynotes and stuff like that. Obviously, if you're a more advanced user and want something more, you can always go buy add-ons and stuff like that. And that's basically how it works. In the future, I've written this database engine in a way that it can work with non-local text files. So in the future, if you decide to use a cloud system, because all it knows is this data store. Data store is the only one that knows about this text file. Basically all this information being written into a text file. So we can adopt and create new formats supported by this data store, and you can have a Cloud REST API that manages this data store. So you can place your Keynote file somewhere on the web and just have everybody use it and use a different locking mechanism and stuff like that. So there's nothing that really limits this Keynote, the evolution of this managed Keynote system to that single text file. Right now, that's the current implementation. The data store can have multiple types. Even if you take a look at the code, um, there's a class that says data store type that's defined that I showed you. So there's the class that's data store, which is the one that actually manages the data store. But there's their data store type that there has only one type right now, which is the text. But there's nothing that stops us from extending this into the future for a file that's sitting on Google Docs or Dropbox or anything else that's out there. So that's what we can do in the future to sort of like extend the functionality of this to the cloud if you need to. Yeah, so that's about it. That's all the new changes that have been added to pyRevit 4.6.9. I'm going to publish this is in draft. I'm going to publish it right now after this video, and I'll do another video on the installer, how you should really install pyRevit on your system, depending on what kind of access you have, what kind of user you are, and stuff like that. And hopefully we don't see any more install errors. And that's it. Thank you.